and after leaving Cambridge with a degree in mechanical engineering and a diploma in industrial management, I joined a French oil field exploration company called Schlumberger, based out of Paris. And I had quite an exciting career, including being deployed from Paris, helping to put out oil fires, international troubleshooting. And my last job with Schlumberger was coordinator of artificial intelligence and geoscience research at the Schlumberger-Doll Research Center in Ridgefield in Connecticut, where I worked on advanced problem-solving techniques where computers emulated human beings. I went back to the UK and started a software company for the international oil industry, and I was the founder. I hired the software people, and we ended up solving the data problem in the international oil industry. So all data moving between major oil companies runs on the software developed by my team. I experienced then just how savage international finances could be, because I ended up having that company and its intellectual property taken away from the original shareholders, laundered through the liquidator, and ending up with my previous employer, a company named Schlumberger, at the time when a director of Schlumberger was John Deutsch, the disgraced former director of the CIA, who was fired by Bill Clinton. And to be fired by Bill Clinton, you've got to be seriously evil, but I digress. After leaving Schlumberger and my own company in the UK, I came to British Columbia in '92. And within 3 weeks of arriving, I sensed I was in the most corrupt jurisdiction in the world, which might surprise a lot of British Columbians and Canadians. But it would appear that organized crime has got to the heart of government itself. And very interestingly, a company called McDonnell Detweiler, that I know very well, was given a contract by the United States Air Force to develop software for taking planes off their regular en route airways and clipping them into what are known as final approach procedures for Category 3C landings. Ostensibly, that was designed as an anti-hijacking technology, but I knew back then, and there was a press release of May the 3rd of 2001, that this would give the Canadian government and the investors in McDonnell Detweiler the ability to hijack aircraft electronically and provide them with the Category 3C landing, ostensibly to protect against physical hijacking of the cockpit. But in reality, of course, if you've got the bad guys operating the drag and drop interface, they can capture a plane remotely, as happened with MH370. So around December the 6th of 2006, I had been desperately trying to alert anyone who would listen to me of the dangers of what are known in the spy industry as man-in-the-middle attacks on the command structure of sovereign states, including America's. And then fortunately, through an episode on September the 11th, I think it was 2000 and whatever, on Coast to Coast with an audience of 4 million, someone listening to me apparently knew someone that I should talk to in the United States that turned out to be Field McConnell. So around December the 6th or December the 7th, 2006, I had a telephone conversation with Field McConnell, and I think instantly, and he can speak for that himself, we knew that we had not a marriage made in heaven, we're not that way inclined, but certainly a meeting of the minds, where a Top Gun fighter pilot with some 22,000 hours of experience in large jets and fighter aircraft, and a Marine and a very credible figure met with perhaps a rather eccentric Brit with some interesting ideas about forensic economics and crime scene analysis. And we probably had an average of an hour's conversation every day since December the 6th of 2006. And that has led to some very interesting legal opportunities, including Field filing a case in the North Dakota District Court against about 100 people associated with the wrongful death of 911. And fast forward to the present, where he, as I understand it, I don't know who his contacts are, other than I believe them to include senior people in the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity Command, believe he has recently received an invitation to appear as an expert witness at one or more of the countries involved in the phony search for the debris and the last ping from the black box of MH370. That's a very rapid summary, but that brings us up to the present. Kerry, over to you.
Okay, well, very, very good summary indeed. At this moment, we have some new information that I posted to my website early this morning, and I believe you certainly would be aware of it, which is this letter from that went into the Malaysian press, from what I understand, came to me by way of Field McConnell, and it is talking about how this particular aircraft and everything that's going on with it could be very much another kind of a 911 incident, and why we have a training, what appears to be a training drill going on simultaneously with the disappearance of this airline. And that piece of information, I think, is new. I don't think anyone else has come forward to say there was a drill going on at the time this airline was disappearing.
I think you're right. It's certainly something that Field and I have been talking about right through 9/11 and the 7/7 underground bombing, where they use these phony drills as camouflage for hits or kidnappings, based on the fact that everyone participating in the drill in good faith is accustomed to receiving orders down through a hierarchical structure, where if you disobey the orders, in the case of the military, of course, it's a mutiny, and so the punishment is extremely serious. What, unfortunately and tragically, many people in those kind of hierarchical organizations is they're not in a position to ask that famous or infamous question, quo warranto, by whose authority? So a senior officer in the drills going on in Thailand through this hijacking of the MH370, anyone receiving an order through the drill would assume that whatever they were told to do came from an authorized source, and they might very well unwittingly participate in what is one of the most interesting, in my opinions, kidnappings the world has ever seen. Over to you.
Okay, yes, that's part of it. The other part is that we also have another relatively recent development, which is this cell phone call with a picture that was black, but nonetheless appears to be traceable to Diego Garcia, which further substantiates the idea that they are kidnapped and that the plane was redirected and steered and landed in Diego Garcia. Whether it took off again, I think we don't know. Do you want to talk about that phone call?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a fascinating anatomical exercise, because this gentleman, I think from memory his name is Philip Woods, and he has a girlfriend by the name of Sarah Bajc. I don't know if the pronunciation is right, B-A-J-C. And somehow this woman pops up and gets an interview on BBC. So she's just one relative of one passenger allegedly on that plane. And I'm always interested when the BBC gets into the loop, because I was a good friend of the former Director General of the BBC, Greg Dyke, who was Director General through 9/11 and the murder of Dr. Kelly. And Greg Dyke was an interesting fellow. I used to play tennis with him and I ate at his house. There was something there that always troubled me about him, was his hatred for Americans, which I couldn't put my finger on why. I mean, I'd worked with Americans and I'm very fond of the country, and I believe it's the great beacon of light for the world, but unfortunately is well covered by a blanket of corruption as we face it today. But so when the BBC interviews people, it pays for conspiracy theorists to look very clearly at the greatest propaganda, entertainment and news instrument the world has ever seen, which was founded in 1928. And so setting aside that particular interview with Sarah Badge, and I'll come to that in a minute, there's a famous, and it wouldn't be described as an interview, but there's a newsreader in New York on 911 by the name of Jane Stanley. And she's being interviewed by an anchorman back in the United Kingdom on BBC about the events of that day. And it's around 5 o'clock in the afternoon of September the 11th, 2001. And she's reading a script. Actually, the more vulgar term for those kind of talking heads is they're script kiddies. That is, they have no independent volition or understanding of what they're reading. They're just being taught to read it in a way that sounds vaguely convincing to the sheeple. And so Jane Stanley reads the script, which goes something along the lines, we are getting news that the Salomon Smith Barney building has collapsed, and that is number 7. And unfortunately for her, over her left shoulder, you can see the building still standing. So the demolition team timing, and this is a vitally important part of the aspect, and the generation of the script for the script kiddies got out of synchronization. And she read a piece of script that really applied to something that was going to happen about 20 minutes later. And of course, the people watching this and watching the reaction of the audience to this extraordinary attack from a long-bearded wonder on a dialysis machine in a cave in Afghanistan with a couple of walkie-talkies, this obviously would reduce the credibility that the world's greatest military power should be brought to its knees by such a character. So they unplugged the feed. And then, of course, the BBC went through multiple gyrations to explain how this was a simple error. But that's exactly the same kind of error that took place in the communications, the real-time communications from the crime scene of MH370, and is associated, I believe, with what is technically called a limited hangout by Sarah Badge. Now, what is this limited hangout? And this is just a hypothesis relating to the boyfriend Philip Woods and Sarah Badge being interviewed on BBC. Well, the story from the Philip Woods and Facebook side is that this guy has a cell phone and ends up, well, he doesn't know where he's ended up, but has a bag put over his head through Facebook, he claims, by American military personnel, where the only way he was able to communicate, and he didn't know where he was, and I don't know if he understood how he was communicating the coordinates of where he was, is taking I assume it would be an iPod rather than an iPad, out of his rectum. Now, I don't know what your sense of humor is like, Kerry, but I do find it bizarre that he should have secreted but who am I to judge? I'm not a biologist. Anyway, he takes the iPad or iPod out of his rectum and then texts in a message to Facebook, and apparently that technology generates the GPS coordinates of where he was. So the experts were able to identify the location where he was, and it turns out to be Diego Garcia. Do you think interpreted the data as you understand it correctly? Over to you.
Yes, you have. Now, I actually have a person who's very technical who has sent me some information that I want to try to convey to you, and actually I'm going to put it in the chat. It's crazy, but what happens is the person who extracted this data went a bit further in than even what had been published, I guess, and says that that the coordinates are even more specific than was previously thought. In other words, that pinpoint exactly that this was actually broadcast from very near a runway. Originally, the information, and I'm posting this in the chat over here. Let me see if I can also do it on the Skype chat here so that you can see it, David. That might be a little tricky. If you hold on one moment, I'm going to do this.
Now, which chat are we talking about? Because I'm technophobic. I'm in a live stream chat. Is that the one that you're
Yes,
about to post
I posted the details on the live stream chat. If you can see that, if you're able to see that. Otherwise, don't worry about it because I'm going to put it in another place.
Okay, while you're doing that, let me just make a point as I understand it. And although I am reasonably technically sophisticated in certain areas, I may have not got this perfectly right, but as I understand it, there are Google coordinates, standard Google coordinates for Diego Garcia, but the device that was transmitting the GPS coordinates showed it as something different from Google. And the expert interpretation of that is it wasn't an artifact introduced by someone spoofing it, that it was a genuine position for the iPad device that had previously been in the rectum of Philip Woods.
Right. It's the device. I mean,